Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our next poem, Mending Wall by Robert Frost. Today we are going to discuss some of the critical aspects of this poem. Dear students, Mending Wall is perhaps one of the most widely quoted poems of Frost. It was included in North of Boston, the collection of poems which was published in 1914. It is a dramatic lyric, or you may call it a monologue. The speaker is young, and the poem is mainly an expression of his views and attitudes. The expression of a young man's views and attitudes. That is, the other is the poet's neighbor, who is an old farmer. However, he is more of a silent member than an active participant in the poem. He does not even talk to us directly. He is only talked about, and his views and attitudes are conveyed to us, filtered through the speaker's mind, memory, imagination, rather viewpoint as well. His conservatism and orthodoxy come alive in all their subtle hues and shades. To all appearances, the monologue is merely descriptive and anecdotal, but it leaves the reader puzzled and bewildered at the end. There lurks a feeling in him, in the reader, that the poet is driving at some point which is not very clear. A vague apprehension of the feeling is the substitute of the clear comprehension of it, and is what the reader has to rest contented with. Dear students, undoubtedly the most striking aspect and feature of this poem, Mending Wall, is its thought content indeed. In fact, it is this aspect of the poem that instantly appeals to us more than any other quality of the poem. The thought of the poem is immediately relevant to modern man more than any other thought. One of the most controversial and baffling problems of our age is the kind of relationship that should exist among nations, among races, among regions, countries, etc. In our age, there is a latent, profound paradox. Geographical divisions between countries, nations, races, regions are constantly giving way to the growth of the world as one large community and the promotion of the feeling of internationalism and globalization, that is. But time and again, fanatic adherence to one's nation sometimes takes the form of militant nationalism. Is the poet favoring internationalism and globalization against that feeling of nationalism and patriotism, that is? Dear students, in Mending Wall, the brief narrative represents two opposed attitudes towards tradition. In that, the poet imaginatively challenges the literal and therefore meaningless rituals, epitomized in the form of a wall, being repaired when there is actually no need for a wall. The speaker in the poem, the poet himself, and his neighbor get together every spring to repair the stone wall between their respective properties, here the farmhouses. Contraposed to the speaker, who is young, vivacious, energetic, and with a flexible mold of mind, as being modernistic in approach towards life, towards living. His neighbor, an old New England farmer, seems to have a deep-seated faith in the value of walls and fences. He does not care to explain his belief, and instead stonily asserts his father's saying, age-old saying, good fences make good neighbors. Dear students, here we find comparisons and contrasts which are direct and indirect, presented in the poem by Robert Frost. First of all, there is a contrast between the age factors, then between the young and the old. Then there is a contrast between the viewpoints, opposing viewpoints of modernity and the past. Then there is another hidden contrast here, the demolishing of walls and the mending of walls. The demolition that is there, the walls are broken naturally or by some unseen forces. Then the human effort to rebuild, to repair these broken walls is also there to be presented as a contrast to the ongoing process of livelihood presented in shape of farmhouses right here. The speaker holds an opinion which is diametrically opposite to that of his neighbor's viewpoint. There, where it is we do not need the wall, he is all pine and I am apple orchard. To his inquisitive that is, and receptive mind, his neighbor's unthinking adherence to his father's saying is a blinkered view and an ignorance which has generally the prerogative of the primitive. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees. It is rather darkness of heart, darkness of ignorance, darkness of the past. And you may also see it as a darkness of the unknown as well. The viewpoint of the neighbor uh, has been presented as a sign of ignorance, whereas the viewpoint of the young man, the poet, has been presented as a viewpoint of new awakening, awakening to the new consciousness of modernity, flexibility. Yet things are not totally in favor of the speaker. His own attitude is also enigmatic and in some respects primitive. If he is so flexible and is against walls or against repairing walls that have fallen down, broken down, then the question is why he is there in springtime to repair them as a ritual. To all appearances, he seems to be in sympathy with some elemental spirit in nature which denies all walls, divisions, boundaries, taking sides with some unknown force. It is implied that there is some supernatural power at work in nature. It is against any kind of fences or walls therein. Something there is that does not love a wall, that wants it down, I could say elves to him. But it is not elves exactly, and I would rather he said it for himself. While the opposing views of the two neighbors are presented with playful seriousness as foils, with the conclusion, the discussion is resolved in favor of the poet's viewpoint. The poem ends with his characteristically emphasizing his neighbor's typical blindness. The poem presents a clash between these two points of views, and it may seem that its meaning is the solution Frost offers to the conflict. The poem leads us to make a choice again, which is of the two in this poem is at right, the speaker or his Yankee neighbor. Again, it is a favorite theme of Robert Frost. Should we tear down the barriers which discriminate and isolate individuals from each other? Or should we be practical and admit that distinctions, boundaries, limitations, and this type of restraints are necessary for human beings if they are to maintain mutual goodwill for protection and security or some other purpose? That is, Frost doesn't really provide an answer. The choice has been left to the reader, rather. and the attempt to wrest one from his casual details and enigmatic comments would falsify his meaning. It is not Frost's purpose to convey a message or give us a lesson in human relationships uh, through this poem. Rather, he poses a question, a paradoxical question to us to choose ourselves between what is right and what is wrong. Is it right to build walls or is it right to demolish them? And this question has to be answered and solved by the reader himself. Dear students, though the poem presents the speaker's attitude more sympathetically than his neighbor's viewpoint, the speaker's viewpoint can't be taken to convey the total sum of the meaning of this poem. We may not be judicious enough to take sides with the young poet only. There might be some uh, necessity involved in the other man's viewpoint of good fences make good neighbors. Frost intends to present a problem and explore the numerous varied and paradoxical issues involved in it. The clash between the speaker and his neighbor lays bare the issue, which within their world is the simple matter of whether or not it is worthwhile to maintain the unnecessary wall in defiance of nature's persistent attempt to tear it down. Dear students, the poem being important mainly because of its thought content, the theme it conveys, it has been interpreted in different ways or different levels by different critics. Many critics have read symbolic meanings in the poem. The wall, for instance, for them, symbolizes all man made barriers, suggesting the divisions between nations, classes, economic, racial, and religious groups, etc. Dear students, but none of these views of the critics gave us a comprehensive, exhaustive meaning of the poem. Lennon, for example, says, in the voices of the two men, younger, whimsical, new fashioned speaker, and the old fashioned farmer who replies with his own determined sentence, single sentenced viewpoint, his inherited maxim, some readers bear the clash of the two forces, the spirit of revolt, that is, which challenges tradition, and the spirit of restraint, which insists that conventions must be upheld, built up, and continually rebuilt as a matter of principle. Therefore, it might be a clash between two opposing traditions, two opposing spirits which are running through the living sap of life. The one great merit of Mending Wall is that although in this poem the idea is the most important thing, the artistic flowering has been subdued by preference to thought content. As Elizabeth Jennings puts it, Frost solemnly indulges at length in the pathetic fallacy, even though somewhat paradoxically perhaps, he often writes about inanimate objects as if they were alive. Everything here is tangible, concrete. The moral which Frost draws out of his poem is not arbitrarily imposed, but it is presented in indirect speech, and so has none of the imperiousness of which we find where the moral is not drawn out of the subject but clumsily pinned to it. Dear students, the most obvious artistic speciality of this poem, Mending Wall, is that it combines the elements of the dramatic and it reflective lyric with the elements of dramatic narrative and dialogue. Thompson, in this regard, makes a deep analysis of the poem. He shows how the style is very apt for drawing a character sketch, and the character helps in the exposition of the central theme of the poem. Rhyme has given way to blank verse, which is more in keeping with the tone of this laconic piece. Metaphor has given way to plain statement, which begins quite casually with a homely Georgic on the wear and repair of stone walls. This little prologue leads directly into the brief reference to the arrangement for mending wall with the neighbors. Then comes the mild and playful conflict of opinions, in the course of which the neighbor is characterized by a single statement, iterated, reiterated, while the narrator's character is developed through the more sprightly and whimsical banter. Dear students, coming on to conclude our 2 days discussion about this poem, we may say that this poem is surely packed with thought. Ideas wise, this poem has the sparkle of a gem indeed. Yet, stylistically too, it is an achievement in itself. The poem is characteristic of Frost's colloquial style, coupled with the usual Yankee reticence, that is, the restraint, the poetic restraint, you may say, and understatement. The poem expresses Frost's philosophy of brotherhood and tolerance, of honest living, against the neighbor's dogmatic, the twine virtues assertion that good fences make good neighbors. Thank you very much, dear students, for participating in this brief discussion on this poem. See you soon, inshallah, in our next discussion. Till then, it is Allah Hafiz and goodbye from my side. Thank you very much again.